Thanks so much for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. The first of at least 3 Elijah McClain trials set to get going on Wednesday, September the 20th, when the trials for suspended Aurora police officer Roedema and former Aurora Police Department officer Jason Rosenblatt will begin. As the first of at least, again, 3 trials in the death of Elijah McClain, who died after his forcible arrest and then receiving a large dose of ketamine by responding paramedics in August of 2019. Joining us to preview this obviously high-profile trial and for what to look for is 9 News Director of Special Projects, Chris Vanderveen, and obviously outlined the very, very preliminary side of everything here. But could you, before we kind of get into the specifics of the trial, what to watch for, could you just give us the broad perspective in terms of why this case, about this case?
Yeah, so I mean the basics of the case are relatively simple, and it's well understood because pretty much all of this is on body camera. But Elijah McClain is walking home late at night. There's a 911 call that goes into Aurora Police that's talking about it's sort of a strange man that's walking down the street with a ski mask on his head. Keep in mind, and I think it's critical to the understanding of this case, that Elijah McClain wasn't accused of doing anything illegal. There wasn't any sort of suspicion of doing anything illegal. It was just a 911 call saying it seems suspicious, it seems strange. And so Aurora Police pull up and they see this man walking down the street with the ski mask on, and they very, very quickly, and this will be a very central part of the case, very, very quickly sort of like ask him what he's doing, and then it turns very physical within a matter of seconds, where he's down on the ground, where there's a chokehold that's involved, where there's forcible restraint on behalf of police officers, and then it sort of spirals from there. But I think a really key understanding of this was that Elijah McClain was not accused of doing anything wrong. There was nothing illegal that he was doing, and then this interaction happened very, very quickly, which then led to a series of events which we can go into later in terms of what happened. But that's critical to understanding what happened that night. There were first Aurora police officers that were on scene, then there were paramedics that were on scene, and then finally there was an ambulance crew that was on scene. And all of that sort of combined to sort of lead to what happened. Elijah McClain did not technically die that day, but his heart did stop, and he never really regained any level of consciousness, and he died a number of days later. And the question of the trial will be, and central to the question of the trial is, how exactly did he die? And that's not exactly clear even this many years later.
And what'll be central to this case? You know, we're talking about a bit of a gray zone in terms of exactly how he died. And again, we're going to get into more on that, but what is central to this case?
I think it's central to this case is the decisions by the officers, particularly as we're talking about this first round of trials, where you have 2 Aurora police officers that were accused of the crime in this particular case. So it's really going to focus in on the actions of the police department, sort of that quick interaction with Elijah McClain as he's walking home, that decision to put him in a chokehold, that decision to put him down on the ground, and then what led after that. Now, keep in mind, those are the officers that put him down on the ground were not sort of primarily responsible for giving ketamine. And I suspect that will be a defense in this particular case, is that the decision to give ketamine and then ultimately the decision to inject him with ketamine, that was made by people other than the police officers. And the question then becomes, if you, and like it's complicated and there's a lot of things going on here, but there is still a question as to how Elijah McClain died. There were, in essence, there was one autopsy that was done originally, and that original autopsy couldn't come to any conclusions. And then years later, there was an amended autopsy by the Adams County Coroner's Office that came to a conclusion that it was likely the ketamine injection that led to the death. But there's a problem there, because the original autopsy called the level of ketamine a therapeutic level of ketamine, meaning not enough to kill Elijah McClain. So it is still a sort of central question to all of this, is that what caused the death of Elijah McClain? Was it ketamine? Was it a chokehold? Was it a combination of everything? This is going to be a challenge for prosecutors. Keep in mind, originally in this case, a very controversial decision by the Adams County District Attorney to not charge the officers. Remember, this went by and the officers were not originally charged by the DA, and then it took a grand jury by the state, really at the urging of the governor, to sort of get a state investigation going on, a state grand jury, and then ultimately it was the Colorado Attorney General that ultimately decided to put the charges. So there's a lot going on here. The case itself is relatively simple and pretty well understood in terms of what exactly happened, because again, like I said, all of this is on body camera. There's some problems at the beginning because the body cameras fall to the ground and you don't get an idea of how much that altercation was taking place, particularly the chokehold. You don't see it very well. But beyond that, we see and pretty much hear everything. So that's understood. It still comes down to how exactly did Elijah McClain die?
Well, in terms of the actual death, it does seem like there's obviously some points of gray area how he died. Maybe one of those things that could be a bit more black and white in this case would be how much ketamine was administered. Do we know about how much was administered?
Yeah, it was too much for his weight.
Okay.
But it wasn't necessarily an amount that would instantly cause him to die. And now there can be debate over that, and I suspect there's going to be a lot of discussion about the level of ketamine that was used. But keep in mind, whether you think it was enough or too much or whatever, the original autopsy called it a therapeutic level of ketamine. Therapeutic meaning not enough to kill. And that's why the original autopsy could not come to a conclusion as to why Elijah McClain died. And that played an integral role in terms of why the DA decided not to charge the officers originally. The district attorney, not the state attorney general, but the district attorney decided not to charge. And that district attorney said, well, I couldn't even get an answer from the coroner as to how Elijah McClain died. So how am I going to charge the officers? And I still believe that is a hurdle for prosecutors to overcome, and they will absolutely have to overcome this, because even though you have an amended autopsy and it says, I believe that ketamine caused the death, it is not certain, and there's some wiggle room there. So I suspect there's going to be outside experts that are going to talk about, was this enough to kill? I mean, this will be a very central issue of the case.
And another central issue of this case is the term that you've done a lot of investigation into with photojournalist Chris Hansen, the term excited delirium, which you've done and devoted a lot of time again to doing. How does this play into this case, and how did it also play into the administering of ketamine here?
So I believe strongly, and I've done a lot of work on this, and so maybe I'm sort of like got a singular vision on this, but I believe that excited delirium is very central to this case. Excited delirium is sort of a term that's been around for a number of years, and it's a pseudo-medical term that's used to describe somebody who is out of control, sweating profusely, high body temperature, impervious to pain, superhuman strength. It's been around in medical literature for a number of years, and there's some really good questions as to whether it's actually a thing, and more importantly, does it cause somebody to die? But starting back really in 2013 and then going for a number of years, Colorado allowed for the administration of ketamine in the field through a waiver program through the state that allowed ketamine to be administered to patients that people believed were experiencing excited delirium. And it really was this idea that we need to calm people down before we transport them. And ketamine sedative could do that. The issue then is that it started being used a lot in the state of Colorado. 2019, for example, there were more than 400 administrations of ketamine to patients on suspected excited delirium cases. Even if you believe in the concept of excited delirium, it's supposed to be extremely rare. There were not 495 people, whatever it is, people experiencing excited delirium that year. It was overused, and I think the state got a lot of criticism for this, overused in cases where people just said, oh, they're being too difficult, we're going to give them ketamine. In the case of Elijah McClain, the reason why he was given ketamine, and this gets overlooked in a lot of this, the singular reason why Elijah McClain was given ketamine was because of suspected excited delirium, this sort of superhuman strength, that kind of thing. And so you hear that on the body cameras. The paramedics openly talk about superhuman strength. We couldn't do this, we couldn't do that. And because of that, we couldn't get the situation calmed down, and we decided to give him ketamine. And that's ultimately, you hear that on the body cameras. That's the decision to give him ketamine is based on that suspicion. And then they give him ketamine, and then very shortly after giving him ketamine, he collapses. I mean, his body really stops breathing, and then they have to do CPR on him in the back of an ambulance that's still on scene. So excited delirium, in that sense, is central to this case because it is the reason why they gave him ketamine. In addition, excited delirium also shows up 3 times. We've reported this extensively on that initial autopsy report by Dr. Stephen Sina, who works with the Adams County Coroner's Office. And Dr. Sina in his original autopsy, remember there wasn't a conclusion, but 3 times he speculates in that autopsy, well, maybe it was excited delirium that killed him. It's an interesting conclusion because it's categorically wrong. Even if you believe in excited delirium, if you watch the beginning of the tape of the interaction with the Aurora Police Department and Elijah McClain is having a conversation. He is fully aware of what's being said to him. His responses, at least to the Aurora Police Department, was a little strange. But he wasn't delirious in any way. And I suspect this is going to be another central issue of the case is why did Dr. Sina come to that original conclusion of excited delirium? To the cynics out there, and there's a lot of them out there when it comes to excited delirium has been used to sort of cover up officer-involved deaths. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but there are people who believe strongly that the term itself has been attached to police reports and autopsy reports to sort of come up with an explanation as to why somebody suddenly dies in police custody. And that will come up very much, I suspect, in trial is why did Dr. Sina originally conclude potentially that it was excited delirium on that first autopsy report?
But I want to get back to the case here a quick second, but I kind of want to expand on the excited delirium component. You mentioned Colorado in 2013 kind of implementing this or allowing for that waiver in this case. Has there been a bit of a reckoning with excited delirium, and how is that working? And also, does that play into this case at all?
Yes and no. So in 2021, the Colorado legislature passed a law that said you can't give ketamine because of suspected excited delirium, and obviously those cases has gone way down. There's been more restrictions that have been placed on the administration of ketamine out in the field. You can't just say, I suspect they have excited delirium, so thus I can give somebody ketamine. There have to be other reasons as to why you can administer ketamine in the field. And there's still plenty of people who believe you shouldn't administer ketamine in the field. There's people who believe strongly you should be able to administer ketamine in the field. But as of now, excited delirium cannot be a singular reason why that happens. So that's definitely changed. As we've reported on extensively, there are other things that have not changed, including police training. Police training in the state of Colorado includes excited delirium. Aurora police, we know, were trained on excited delirium to sort of spot it. The state of Colorado, through the peace officers and standards and training, which is also known as POST, they mandate excited delirium training for all new officers. So it's very pervasive in training. It's just not as much so given as a reason as to why to give ketamine out in the field.
So with that said, who will testify, and what sort of testimony will you be specifically watching for in this case?
So what's interesting about this case is that a lot is not known because, like a lot of cases, we'll get a witness list beforehand, so we'll know who's going to testify in this case. We have suspicions of who are going to testify, but we don't know specifics. And so that'll be interesting to see who is taught, because there's been, in essence, a sort of a gag order on the case, and so that's not shared with the public. So we won't know until in some cases until they're on the stand. What I'll be looking for is really this discussion of how did Elijah McClain die, and can we prove it, and also prove it to a jury that is supposed to only source. I mean, keep in mind, this is a jury that's only supposed to take evidence. Not everything they've heard about the case, maybe potentially so or not so, but only they're supposed to base their decision solely on what they hear in court. And is there enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these officers caused the death of Elijah McClain, are guilty of the crimes that they're accused of? And that is not an easy, that is not an insignificant hurdle to jump over. And I suspect that's going to be a challenge for the prosecutors in this case. It's not something that they can't overcome for sure, but it will certainly be a challenge for them.
Anything else to add about this case before we get into it?
I just think it's one of those cases that didn't get a lot of attention when it first happened. It got some attention. We covered it here at 9 News. But then in 2020, when George Floyd died, when he was murdered, there was renewed attention on cases like this. And the New York Times does a story on Elijah McClain, and then it becomes a big international story. Deservedly so. There has been a lot of attention on this case, not just here in Colorado, but around the country and around the world. And there's certainly going to be a lot of eyes on this case and seeing, was it the right decision? Now, keep in mind, it goes back to the original DA's decision to not prosecute this case. That DA decides, don't have enough evidence to bring this case to trial. The governor then gets involved at a time when it's very political in nature. There's a lot of discussion about George Floyd. There's a lot of talk around Elijah McClain. There's protests around the country. And so the governor gets involved, and the state AG then gets involved. And all of a sudden now there's charges. And so the question will be, do they have the evidence now that the original DA felt he didn't have? Do they have the evidence to secure a conviction at trial? And it's you're going to get a sense of where this case is going to go, but keep an eye on ketamine, how much ketamine he had in his system, the use of the term excited delirium in the case, and the cause of death, the original autopsy and the amended autopsy. All four of those things are really going to be critical in terms of how this case goes.
And we'll be covering it here on 9 News, of course, extensively. We'll also have daily talkbacks with reporter Kevin Vaughn, investigative reporter Kevin Vaughn, who will also be at the courthouse for the Elijah McClain trial. But in the meantime, Chris Vanderveen, Director of Special Projects here at 9 News, thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus.
You bet. Thanks, Chris.